And joining us now with more on the International Court of Justice decision is Arsen Ostrovsky, attorney and CEO of the International Legal Forum. Thank you so much for joining us. So the International Court of Justice issued a decision on Friday. Can you break it down for us? Is this a win for Israel or a loss?
Sure. I mean, look, I think first of all, we have to put this in context. What we saw on Friday was not only a mockery of justice, but it was a gross travesty of justice and a perversion of the meaning of the word genocide. It is not Israel that ought to have been on trial, quite frankly, but Hamas. It is Hamas who has genocidal ambitions and intentions, which it acted out on October 7th when it committed these most heinous atrocities and crimes. In terms of whether the decision of the Court of Justice itself was a victory or not, that really depends on how we look at it. South Africa sought a number of different provisional measures or injunctions. They got a number of them, but the one which they really sought was a ceasefire. They did not receive. The court made a number of determinations, many of which were quite perhaps problematic. However, it did not order a ceasefire and it did not compel Israel to halt its military operations. These will continue, and in that regard, I think that is a victory for the state of Israel.
And so, according to what you're saying, the court failed to throw out the case entirely, though. What will happen next?
So the court did not throw out the case entirely, as perhaps it ought to have. What it did say essentially was that there is some merit to South Africa's case, but that will need to be proved in substance at a hearing, with such hearing to be conducted perhaps in maybe 2 or 3 years' time. There's really no telling in terms of that. I mean, it ought not to have gone even to that stage, but I think that was inevitable. Given the composition of the court, given that the court itself is an organ of the United Nations. So I think we did expect that to some extent, but the court did not make any determinations as to the substance, really, of South Africa's case. That will be heard later. But we do need to underscore that not only did the court not compel Israel to cease its operations, but it did also importantly call for the release of hostages as well.
Slight change in direction. UNRWA. The UN has found UNRWA to be complicit in Hamas terror activity. So how can that same body be taken seriously when bringing Israel to a court for genocide? How can you even explain this?
Sure. I mean, UNRWA is the last organization in the world that ought to be taken seriously at all. UNRWA has become an indispensable and indistinguishable arm of Hamas. They are an incubator for relentless hatred, anti-Semitism, and incitement. We have seen UNRWA staff playing an active role and participating in the massacre of October 7th and the ongoing situation with the hostages of Israel that remain in Gaza. To this day, we have seen UNRWA textbooks glorifying hatred. We have seen UNRWA staff and employees glorifying Hitler and Nazism. We have seen Hamas rockets and weapons stored underneath the noses of UNRWA schools and facilities. UNRWA has no role to play whatsoever in the reconstruction of Gaza, and it is a positive step that a number of leading democracies, the US, Germany, UK, Canada, Australia, and others have taken to suspend funding to UNRWA based on these really disturbing allegations. But that is just one step in the right direction. Quite frankly, UNRWA must be defunded once and for all and disbanded.
Back to the ICJ, there was one judge from Uganda, the only woman judge from Uganda, Julia Sebutindi, who voted against every single measure brought by South Africa against Israel. How do you explain her vote, and is the case going to be bound to rule against us in the end?
That's a good question. I guess time will tell. Time will also tell if the case even goes towards the full hearing. Ultimately, depending on the way the operation in Gaza continues. The judge from Gaza, I mean, she really did stand out. You know, we sometimes say not all heroes wear capes, or perhaps some wear judges' robes, and she showed moral clarity. She showed an understanding of the rule of law, as well as the weight of history as well. And I suppose perhaps someone that comes from Africa that understands very well also the threat of such kind of attacks, what genocide really is, and also what it is not. So I think her outstanding dissenting opinions where she voted against the proposals on every single measure really do stand out, both for their moral clarity, for their judgment, as well as their application of international law as it ought to be applied in these circumstances.
Arsen, thanks. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but thank you for joining us.
My pleasure. Thank you.